Welcome everyone, my name is Rich Whitworth, I'm Content Director of The Medicine Maker and I'm delighted to be moderator at today's event, which is organised by The Medicine Maker and Ireland's National Institute for Bioprocessing Research and Training, also well known as NIBRT, which is recognised as a global leader in biopharma research and training. The webinar is entitled Trends in Biopharma, Workforce Development, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by not one but two speakers. We have Killian O'Driscoll and John Milne, both are from the aforementioned NIBRT. Please allow me to quickly introduce them. Killian is the Director of Projects at the National Institute for Bioprocessing Research and Training, as already mentioned. He's a genetics graduate from Trinity College Dublin with a Master's in Management of Innovation from the University of London. He's also an Associate Lecturer in Project Management at Dublin Business School. Working closely with all stakeholders in the biopharmaceutical industry, Killian has been involved in the successful establishment of NIBRT, which has numerous international accolades, including the ISPE Facility of the Year and Bioprocess International Manufacturing Collaboration of the Decade. We also have John, who joined NIBRT in 2013 in the role of Training Director. He works with the training team who are responsible for delivering NIBRT's training and education programs to both industrial and education clients. John graduated from the University College Dublin with a PhD in biochemistry, specialising in molecular enzymology. He has over 25 years of experience in the purification processes for proteins and peptide products, and throughout his career in industry, he has performed in a variety of roles from process development, scale-up, tech transfer, and GMP commercial production. Importantly, I should note that Killian and John will both be on hand at the end of the presentations to take your questions. You can do that at any time throughout the webinar simply by clicking the Ask a Question button on your screen. So please do take the opportunity to benefit from their many years of combined experience. Before we begin, we'd be very grateful if you could answer us some questions. We have 3 short poll questions as part of the webinar, and they'll be popping up on your screens momentarily. I'll read them out as we go, and then if you can just click the appropriate answer, we'd be very grateful. So, question number 1 is, how difficult are you finding it to recruit staff? A number of options there, from extremely difficult to not at all difficult. Poll number 2, what positions are most in demand? Once again, a number of options there, bioprocess engineers, automation engineers, and so on. And finally, poll question number 3, what is your preferred method of training? And that goes from practical training in the lab or pilot plant, on the job training, and so on. Okay, so thank you for answering those. We're now ready to begin with the first presentation from Killian. So Killian, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Rich, very much for that introduction, and thank you to everybody for dialing in today. I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then my colleague John is going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. The objectives that we want to cover in this event is, what I'm going to do is kind of set the scene. I'm going to talk about key trends in biopharma workforce development, what the challenges are, what's driving that from the demand side, and then we'll hand over to John, who'll talk about kind of potential solutions to address the skill shortage that we're seeing in biopharma workforce development. So the first section of the talk is having a look at key trends in global workforce development. And what I want to reference, and a source for some of these slides, is a piece of work that NIBRT here have done with the Medicine Maker. Every year we do an annual survey on key trends in biopharma manufacturing, and that survey is available from our website, and you can see the link there. And it's also available from the Medicine Maker, who'll be producing a series of articles throughout the course of the year. But as you can see from the slide, when we asked clients, and there was over 150 global respondees to this survey, what the biggest challenges are for the ongoing growth of the biopharma industry, you can see by far the standout reply was availability of staff, availability of technical skills. And we were somewhat surprised by the strength of this response. As you can see, it is almost 50% of the respondents replied that this was the biggest challenge for them. When we dig into that in a little bit more detail, and we ask the question, can you be a little bit more specific and talk about the roles that are in particular challenges, and that kind of reflects the polling question that Rich asked you at the start of this webcast. And what we can see is the breakdown into what we would call the specialist engineering disciplines. So things like bioprocess engineer, automation engineer, CQ&V engineers are particularly challenging to hire and to find people with the right skill set. And then also the scientific community, the manufacturing sciences and technology community, and then less problematic as you go into the kind of QA/QC roles, and then into operators and technicians roles. A further question we asked, just to kind of better understand this trend, was when employees were looking to hire, what were the key competencies that they were looking for? And again, you can see coming out very strongly in this particular graph is employers looking for employees with strong scientific, engineering, and technical skills, which is what you would expect, but then also very strongly featuring things like business skills, emotional intelligence, and the key competencies in that area, and very interestingly, prior experience in a GMP environment. And of course, that's a huge challenge, particularly for people without experience, fresh graduates, so to speak, to get that GMP experience. And we'll talk a little bit further about potential solutions to help address that. So that's the kind of the global scene setter. And what I did want to reference was just talk about one particular geographic location. So we can, and that's in particular in Boston, in the US. As many of you know, a global hub for discovery, development, and manufacture within biopharma manufacturing. And we can see an interesting report from the Boston Globe from May of last year, where they're predicting 17% increase in job availability. And even though they're increasing the supply side, they increased the number of associate degrees by 100% from 2010. There's still a shortfall. They increased the number of associate graduates from associate degrees by 56% rather. But on the demand side, the demand grew by 100%. Then with respect to PhDs, the output was increased by 16%, but the demand increased by 43%. So we can even see in an economy such as Boston, which has been at the forefront of driving biopharma manufacturing, a real crunch in skills. So now that we've kind of set the scene and perhaps define what the problem statement is, we wanted to explore in a little bit more detail what the root causes for this skills crunch are. And in this particular slide, you can see a nice graph from Evaluate Pharma talking about the overall growth in biopharma manufacturing. And you can see it has more than trebled in the last 15 years. From 2016 onwards, there's been a more than a threefold increase in the value of the global biopharma market. We're seeing biologics dominating very strongly. 50% of the top 100 products by 2022 will be biopharma. And then kind of specifically the product that's being manufactured, monoclonal is very dominant over the last period, forecast to still be the dominant therapeutic over the upcoming period, but there's an interesting diversification behind that, which we'll talk about in a few slides. Another nice view of the growth in the industry is when we look at the manufacturing capacity and the supply and the availability of capacity on a global basis. A nice report from CPHI, which is talking about a 14% year-on-year increase in the amount of capacity that's needed, and obviously you need the workforce to support, to design, to build, and to operate such capacity. And again, just to illustrate the fact that this is a global industry with a global skills criteria, we can see that the demand within Europe at 38%, the neck and neck with the US also at 38%, and very fast growth within Asia at 24%. Notwithstanding the fact that monoclonals have been the dominant therapy and look set to dominate for the next number of years, a key trend which is causing workforce development issues is the diversification of the type of molecule that's coming through the pipeline. And we've all witnessed been tremendous scientific development. At the moment, these manufacturing processes are somewhat manual, so driving a large amount of demand for highly skilled operators, technicians, scientists, and engineers to manufacture the next generation therapies. But not alone is it a diversification in the types of products that we're asking our staff to manufacture. What we're also seeing is significant diversification in the manufacturing processes themselves. And we are seeing the regulators, as nicely illustrated by the previous FDA commissioner, we're seeing the regulators having a more proactive approach to innovation, technology adoption within the manufacturing environment. So what do those technologies look like? And you'll forgive the next slide, which is quite a busy slide, but this lays out some of the key technologies that we here in NIBRT have been approached by our clients and by the vendor community over the last period, expressing an interest in evaluating these technologies, deploying them within the manufacturing environment, and training their staff on these manufacturing technologies. And 10 years ago, these technologies would not have featured in a strong way within our training programs, but now they're becoming a core part of how we train our graduates, of how we train our clients' employees. So we're seeing increased use of digitization, and as you know, that's commonly called Industry 4.0 or Biopharma 4.0, increased prevalence of automation, increased prevalence of very interesting technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality. Continuous manufacturing has been a strong theme, or process intensification over the last number of years. We're seeing robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. So we are seeing a demand for biopharma manufacturing workforce to have a skill set in these new areas. But I did want to reference also as an illustrator of the diversification of skills that are of technologies that are required in the manufacturing processes is a nice piece of work that's been done by the Biopharma Operations Group, or BPOG, and their technology roadmap, where they have laid out the future view of manufacturing and the technologies that will underpin that. And again, I've included the reference there if anybody is interested in finding out more information about that technology roadmap. So as we conclude the first section of the talk, before I hand over to my colleague John, some of the key conclusions that we'd like to leave the audience with today is that there is a growing global shortage of biopharma manufacturing workforce, and that's throughout the globe, as illustrated by the example from Boston. From a demand perspective, the key factors that are influencing this shortage are the increasing global demand for the manufacture of monoclonals, emerging demand for the manufacture of new therapeutic modalities such as cell and gene and others, and the increasing diversification of advanced manufacturing technologies, whether that's single-use, digitization, data analytics, etc. For the second half of the talk, we're going to flip then to the supply side. So how do we address these particular issues? And we'll give some case studies on that. But at the heart of it, from the supply side, currently is an issue that there's a lack of capacity to provide the hands-on practical training that's required for biopharma manufacturing. And also, interestingly, what we find amongst our students is there's a limited public awareness of the fantastic high-value employment opportunities that are available in biopharma manufacturing. So John is going to pick up on these themes as we move on to the second section of the talk, which talks about developing staff competence. So John, I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Killian, and good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, as Killian said, we know, we have a good appreciation of what the trends in the industry actually are. So the obvious question then is, what do we do in terms of developing staff competencies? So I'm just going to click on there. Yeah. So just as a touch point, just to introduce this piece of the presentation, there's obviously several different mechanisms by which one would strive to train individuals to work in any industry, but particularly in our industry. And what we do know from survey results that we've had, that Killian alluded to earlier, that it really is about the best route to learning is through active, engaged learning using practical instruction combined with on-the-job training. There's obviously several tools for training, but the practical hands-on competency piece would always seem to be called out as being very important. So before I get into the meat of the conversation, it's really to talk a little bit about our approach. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our organisation, NIBRT is an institute based in Dublin. The role that we have is to support the industry and academia to develop best-in-class training solutions. And to facilitate that activity, we have a fully functioning training plant where people can come in and actively engage in our facility. So just in terms of training model, and for the purposes of today's conversation, we're talking about the skills agenda, workforce readiness. So the key thing that we like to emphasize in all our training programs is that at the heart of all our programs is the word competency. People come to our facility not so much to look at us performing operations, it's to actively engage and to perform those operations themselves. So it's the key criteria that we would like to emphasize in this conversation is that aspect of hands-on engaged learning. I'll come back to that a little bit later. We do that in several ways in terms of workforce readiness. So obviously the university students and college students of today become the practitioners in industry tomorrow. So it's very important that academic programs, particularly in the life science spaces, are going to have an aspect of practical instruction, and we engage with a lot of various institutes in our own country here to give these students the opportunity to have that hands-on practical piece to add a context to their theory sessions that they'll be getting as part of their academic program. That then translates right through to post-hiring. So when people are hired in facilities, the key thing that companies will want to do is to ensure that workforce are then fit for purpose, and there's different mechanisms by which we can do that by virtue of a series of courses, be they short courses, theory courses, right up to including full education programs. But again, the key attribute of all our programs that we like to emphasize is that they are hands-on in a fully functioning plant. So what I thought I would do for my piece of the conversation would be just to talk a little bit about, we know where the industry has come from. We have a very good understanding from Killian as to where the industry is likely to go, and we are no doubt seeing the emergence of what people generally call advanced therapeutic medicinal products, or ATMPs, be they gene therapy-based, cell therapy-based, or tissue engineered medicines. And these are bringing a whole raft of challenges to the industry, because essentially they're new processes. They don't lend themselves necessarily to template manufacturing that we would have been familiar with respect to the more established, let's say, monoclonal antibody industry. So again, just to emphasize that, and just to emphasize the positivity that's existing around the industry right now, there are some incredibly powerful treatments that are being developed and have recently been approved. For example, the CAR-T cell treatments pioneered by Novartis and others with respect to cell therapies. So just a slight pause in the presentation here. But again, people may be familiar with some of these products. And of course, we're now getting into the notion of personalization of medicine, and this again is presenting and will present challenges for those companies that have to develop a skilled workforce. It's becoming much more about the ability of the individual to process these cells, as opposed to large-scale manufacturing batches that we would be familiar with to date. Again, we're seeing the emergence of gene therapies with the most recent approval of Luxturna. And again, this is a trend that we are going to see continuing over the next few years. There are a lot of products being developed, and the general impression is that we will have a lot of these, more of these products to have to manufacture. Hence, we need a skilled workforce to do so. And what I always try and emphasize to people, and particularly for those of you that are familiar with our industry, it is, as you know, a very highly regulated industry. So there's no better place to look as to the requirements of a workforce than what the regulators will actually say. And most recently in 2017, the European Union have put out their guidelines for GMPs that specifically relate to advanced therapy products. And Chapter 3 of that document addresses in a lot of detail the issue as regards personnel that should be deployed and how you would engage those trainees in a training program and employees to make sure that they're fit for purpose. It's not that different to maybe what we've done before, but obviously there are nuances with respect to ATMPs that are exercising regulators. So there's a couple of slides there. I won't go through them in any great detail. They'll be available after the conversation. But if people are interested, it's a nice document to actually read with respect to the requirements from a regulatory perspective as to what the expectations on staff will be. So I'll just move through the next couple of slides quite quickly for that reason. Our approach really in NIBRT, as I said, is to really focus on people's ability to receive what can often be very complex instruction. And there is, a psychology to learning methods that will be well established that generally suggests that you remember about 10% of what you read, you remember about 90% of what you do. So engaging trainees in an active learning environment has proven itself to be the most successful way to stimulate higher order thinking, problem solving, and critical analysis, which clearly, as most people would identify with, are key skills to work in our industry. So, for training to be deemed to be effective, we engage in what we call competency-based learning. We get trainees to engage in programs that encourage and facilitate active learning, and this really means engaging the trainees in all aspects of their learning process, to get them to think about what they do, to get them to troubleshoot processes, and that gives them that higher order learning that we feel will be required when they transition into the industry. And of course, all this technology and this type of concept is not really new. If you think about what was said way back in history by Aristotle, what we have to learn to do, we actually learn by doing, and it's a very true statement. And I think the more we engage trainees from a variety of backgrounds in different processes with different companies, we really see the benefit of that, and they appreciate that aspect of learning. So again, for those of you that would like to read a little bit more about, I can refer you to a nice document that was put out recently. If I can just, seems to be a little delay. Yeah, which was a document entitled Training for Biotech Manufacturing Operator Competence that was put out by the BPOG group. And it gives a nice model building for novices, building right through their learning right to up to and including advanced training, skills and building. And that type of logic, where you start to introduce somebody to an operation, get them to understand all aspects of that, to walk down the equipment, and then qualifying them in some way to perform that operation without supervision, right to up to reinforcement and then into advanced skills, perhaps becoming trainers themselves in a network. It's been very well proven, and that document, if people are interested, gives you a nice overview of some of those concepts. So one thing that I thought would be interesting would be just to look at maybe just one operation, not in great detail, but just to give you an understanding of, for an operation like running a bioreactor, which of essence is a very complex operation. If you were training, our philosophy to training individuals in that space is that, you would introduce the person to the operation, the basis of the step, the various components that are contributing to that operation, and then we would introduce specific skill-based training. And this can be done by companies in the work environment. Very often companies don't have the capacity to make their equipment available to trainees or new hires because it's typically involved in production scenarios. So they will probably engage a third-party training organization like NIBRT, for example, to help them on that journey. But it's really to get people to understand in a very active way all components of the system. They'll begin to work, obviously, they will have to work to approved SOPs, they'll have to be competent initially under supervision, and then they will be more independent. And the highest probably order of training or learning is that could they then deliver that training to somebody else. So there are various milestones in building somebody's competency in all operations. And that just gives a little example. And of course, the logic behind all of this and why do we engage in is really to make sure that we minimize the errors that take place. Errors in a production scenario are costly. You lose time, you lose effort, you may lose product, and they're very disruptive. So getting people to understand the nature of errors, it's been long proven, for example, that, very often the people who make mistakes or when mistakes are made, those mistakes are made by individuals who you would least suspect would make that mistake. So the psychology of why people make errors and what you're trying to do in a production environment, obviously, in any industry, is to prevent those scenarios. So really the type of individual and the skills that we need in our industry is quite broad. I mean, obviously, if somebody's operating a highly technical piece of equipment or technical operation, they need technical depth. They need to be very competent and confident on that operation. If they then want to expand, they need to really, within a company, they need to understand the breadth of that operation, what comes before, what comes after, troubleshooting, trending of data, for example. And then, of course, if they may transition into higher professional levels in a company, they need more competencies with respect to, people have to work in teams, people have to be critically able to solve problems and work together when incidents happen. So really the skills for a biopharma professional are wide, and the skills, the training, and most importantly, the attitude of the people is very important. Attitude is a very difficult thing to train, so companies have to be very selective and careful as to when they're hiring that those individuals will fit that mandate. And so finally, for me, really, is just my final thoughts on this part of the conversation is really that, as Killian has outlined, biopharmaceuticals will continue to play an ever-increasing role in strategies and positive outcomes for patients. The challenge of ensuring the personnel are suitably qualified and trained in what is a very highly regulated industry will become an ever more increasing challenge. There is no doubt that competency, active learning, hands-on training programs do equate with success. And if companies then holistically look at the training of their individuals, not just to fulfill regulatory requirements, but go beyond that, they will most likely have a more educated, motivated workforce who will have the requisite skills, and that has to be a win for all employers. So maybe I'll stop there and pass over to Rich now in terms of moving on the conversation.
Thanks very much, John and Killian, for those fantastic insights into training. As John said, we're going to open a Q&A session now. I've seen some questions have already come in, which is great. Thank you very much. If you have a question for Killian or John or both, please do submit them. We'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have left. So, John and Killian, are you both ready for some hard-hitting questions?
Yeah, absolutely looking forward to it.
Okay, so first question. I guess this sounds like someone that may have missed your part, the early part of your presentation, Killian, but it's a good chance for you to give a bit of a summary, I guess. They say, what are the key reasons for global skills shortage in biopharma? So perhaps you can just give us a quick whistle-stop review.
Sure. I think both on the demand and on the supply side. On the demand, what we're seeing is very strong growth in the capacity for biopharma manufacturing as the industry continues to grow. We're seeing diversification and new types of products coming through the pipeline. We're seeing increased complexity in the manufacturing operations. So that's the three principal reasons on what's creating the demand. And then what's kind of causing the supply to lag a little bit is John's part of the talk, is really the difficulty in training people in a hands-on, practical way around biopharma manufacturing. It requires a very dedicated facility, which is beyond, I suppose, the ability of many universities to do that. So you need specialist, dedicated facility to be able to do that.
Sure. Someone else asks, which is, I guess, another nice chance to summarise some of what was included in the presentations. I guess the long answer to this could be very long, but Killian, perhaps you can offer a sort of a short and brief answer. They say, how can companies best address the global skills shortage? It sounds like the subject of a PhD thesis, but perhaps you could condense it down into a few sentences.
Yeah, it's. I don't think one company alone can do it. Really, what's required, where we've seen success in this, is when there's very strong collaboration between an industry sector as a whole in a geographic location, between government and between academia. So it's those three key stakeholders coming together to put together a collective solution. Oftentimes that's funded initially by government, but the industry might pay, for example, for use, and academia might actually staff the facility. So my short answer is by collaborating with all relevant stakeholders. And then the long answer, as you say, would be a PhD thesis.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Killian. Perhaps one for you, John. You touched there upon some of the sort of advanced therapies coming through the pipeline. Someone asks, how significant will the impact of cell and gene therapies be?
Good question. I think all information that we would have, and from various reports we read, is that there is no doubt that there is a transition to new advanced therapies. I mean, there is an argument that they will still remain niche. Monoclonals, as Killian has said, will continue to be the dominant modality going forward, and we can learn a lot from that industry with respect to training. There is some degree of overlap in approach to training, and even certain operations that may lend themselves to transfer to cell and genes. FDA recently, I think last year, estimated that they could approve up to 40 gene therapies within the next few years, based on the number of trials and INDs they've seen. So, I mean, there's no doubt that these molecules are coming. There's a lot of larger companies who are now beginning to, throughout mergers and acquisitions, to acquire a foothold in the industry. So it's only a matter of time before the questions will be asked with respect to training of individuals. And as I said, we are spoiled to a certain extent currently how we manufacture biologics, because most of them will follow a pretty much well-defined template, whereas with some of these new modalities, the methods of manufacturing, even within gene therapies, is very different. So It's a very young industry. And I think that's what's contributing to the perceived or actual skills gap in that space.
Sure, that makes sense. Here's a question that I don't I'm not sure where it stems from really, but maybe a misunderstanding that you can address or not. They say, are you saying that NIBRT is one of the only training centres for industrial biotech manufacturing? Not sure who wants to take that one.
I don't think we'd say that. We have a very strong focus on biopharma manufacturing, so the manufacture of therapeutics as opposed to industrial biotech. And for sure, there's other centres doing fine jobs. I think there's the BTech Centre in North Carolina is well established. We're partnering with the Jefferson Institute for Bioprocessing, which is opening in Philadelphia. There's the WPI in Massachusetts. We're aware of similar institutions, perhaps at a smaller scale, such as EASE in Strasbourg in France and Switzerland also. So yeah, there's quite a considerable number of people involved in this space for sure.
And the sub part to that question was, do you have 1 week intensive courses on manufacturing? I should add that one in.
Yeah, of course. That's our bread and butter, really. So if anybody, what we have up on the slides now is the stay in touch details. So if anybody wants to contact John or I directly or refer to our website, all the details should be there. But we'd be more than happy to follow up with people individually.
Great, thank you, Killian. Here's a good question. And I like the fact they've limited the answer to 3. They say, what are the 3 things that universities can work on in developing entry-level graduates for the biopharma industry? And they say outside of practical work experience opportunities within their own program. So I guess prepping them for programs like yours, Killian and John. What can universities do to help?
Well, actually, what we do, Rich, we do have very active engagements with a series of universities and colleges in Ireland. And so what we're really doing is, and they've often asked us to advise them in terms of their curriculum. They are responsible for the majority of the theory sessions. But I think the key thing that the university or third level sector can do is to make sure that their curricula that they're teaching are leaning towards the new technologies, and also I think to highlight to their students who are coming to completion of courses that this is a very exciting industry. There are very worthwhile careers in this industry, and that if they want to positively embrace it, there are methods and ways in which they can. A lot of students come out of university and they're a bit daunted by this industry. They regard it as being, it's very complex, it's technical, but there are routes, a very detailed way that those students can improve, can develop, and build a career. And the sky's the limit in this industry. What we tend to find is we're often asked to contribute during programmatic review periods, but within universities, and we teach into some programs. But the best way we can complement them is to give the students the ability to access our training plans here, which the universities don't naturally have. But I think there's no doubt that if we want to grow the future workforce, it's a two-way street really, because I think the companies themselves have to really engage with the industry, with the university sector as well, to foster that level of education, to open up their doors to perhaps give students placements and become much more intrinsically involved in some of the curriculum development. Because if the future students need certain skills, the first place they'll get them is actually within the university sector, and hopefully they'll build on those in industry. So I think the industry and industry engagement with the third level sector could be very powerful, and we encourage that as much as we can here in Ireland. Fantastic.
Thanks a lot, John. That was great answer. Here's a specific question about the programs at NIBRT. They say, can curriculum and practical work be tailored to the sponsor's needs when it comes to skill set development? So I guess that's it. Are there sort of personalised training programs available?
Yeah, it's maybe I'll take that one. So each year, the answer is yes. Each year, NIBRT trains over 4,000 people, and about 50% of that, so about 2,000 of those people come on courses that are tailored to meet a client's specific requirements. So many of our clients would approach us and they want to have, for example, a specialist course on cell culture that reflects their particular processes. And once we have a non-disclosure agreement and a confidentiality agreement in place, we will customize our training material and the training experience to meet that client's particular criteria. So that customization of the training experience is a core part of what we do, for sure.
Great, thank you, Killian. Here's a good question. From your perspective, what are the key elements to create a GMP/quality culture in an organisation? And secondly, how can NIBRT help in this effort?
So obviously, this is John here, Rich. Obviously, the foundation upon which everything is built in our industry is GMP, good manufacturing practice. And that goes across all disciplines. From a training competency perspective, I gave you an indication there in the slides as to what the expectation from regulators actually is with respect to GMP. And I mean, it's a key thing we often say, particularly to our students, is GMP is in a lot of ways can be quite a tough regime to work in. It doesn't suit everybody. So I think really building that into students quite early, that if you want to work in this industry, you will be subject to quality guidance, to GMP, what it is. A lot of companies, for example, use that as one of their criteria to hire somebody. You must have GMP experience, so to speak, and which is a bit awkward for students who may not have been exposed to that environment.
Right.
But I think everybody can be taken on that journey. At the end of the day, when the inspectors come in, and when I had to sit and deal with inspectors in my manufacturing environment, one of the key things they want to see, it's not so much what exists on paper with respect to your training. They want to actively go out onto the floor to see staff actually engaging in the operation. So what I like to say to our trainees from industry is that in a sense you're really representing the company, because when the inspector engages with you in a GMP setting, they want to hear particular answers. They don't want you to be evasive. They want to get the impression that that individual is competent, knows the science, knows what they're doing, and that is a good reflection of the quality system that the company actually has. And If the training of the staff isn't right, or the culture or the quality isn't right, as somebody said, a bad culture in a facility can make the best SOP redundant. So it's really emphasizing the importance, and I think that's we are making products for patients. There's nothing more, stringent as that. So getting people to be aware, to have the philosophy, to buy into the concepts of GMP as early as you can. And most companies do that very well. They'll have reinforcement programs. From an operations perspective, it's just learning to execute the operation according to a GMP set of guidance. So there's a lot that can be done. It can be, but it has to be seen as a very positive and necessary thing that to work in our industry. GMP is the foundation upon which all success is built.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Here's a question slightly from my bias as a former editor of The Analytical Scientist, but they say, do you provide any technical training for analytical quality control laboratories?
Yeah, so John here again, Rich. Yes, absolutely we do. So for those people that might be interested in NIBRT, we essentially have four, disciplines that we're heavily involved in: upstream cell culture, downstream purification, formulation fill finish, and then analytics, QC, characterization. So we have a series of programs, and we actually support the university sector and commercial companies in providing, again, as Killian emphasized, customized programs. So we will try and build the training around the specific needs of the client. So analytics is a strong. We have quite a large analytical training laboratory here, where we would cover all aspects of pharmacopoeial testing, up to and including characterization and quality control using HPLC and mass specs. So yes, we do cover that area. It's an area that's attracting a lot of attention, actually.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, it's a huge issue, right, in the biopharmaceutical world. Here's a nice broad question, so you can put your thinking caps on. They ask, do you think the biopharma industry is communicating clearly how experienced professionals can bring existing skills and learn new biopharma skills to reduce the resource gap? And what can they or industry forums do to help?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting question, and I think the biopharm industry is improving in that regard, but there's still a way to go. We'd often compare with, say, the technology sector, where the technology sector for many years has been able to take people from other disciplines and cross-skill them and reskill them for their own particular purposes. And we're beginning to see that trend emerging, but it's only emerging within biopharma. One particular thing that we have seen, which is encouraging, is, and I suppose this is within perhaps the Irish context, as we've seen some older small molecule facilities begin to close down, we've seen those people with excellent small molecule experience, and obviously they have strong GMP backgrounds as well,
right,
be effectively cross-trained, retrained for biopharma, and then go on to have very successful careers within biopharma. And when I mentioned earlier that the success to addressing this global workforce development skills shortage is around collaboration between government, industry and academia. I'm aware of some, within the Irish context, of some very good government and EU-funded initiatives that actually provide free training to people from other sectors who wish to cross-train for biopharma. So each year we would deliver those training programs to around 400 people who would come to the universities, come to the NIBRT facility to get that hands-on practical training, and they might come from a wide variety of previous disciplines.
Fantastic. Thank you, Killian. I think that's a good point to end the webinar. I'd like to thank you both very much for answering those questions. You did a great job of that. Also, thank you for the fantastic presentations once again. I'd just like to mention to our viewers that the webinar will be available on demand in the very near future at themedicinemaker.com. So please check that out if you want to review any of the things that John and Killian have said. Also, obviously, feel free to pass that link on to any colleagues who you think might benefit from the information contained within this webinar. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much again to Killian and John. I'd like to thank everyone else for attending, and that's it from me. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, Rich.